Bookaholics is a safe place for reading junkies who obsess over books, authors, bookstores, book news, and book trivia. We'll nerd out with book reviews, author interviews, our habit, and other bookish things. Here is your host, Deirdre Pippins.
Welcome to the Bookaholic podcast. My name is Deirdre Pippins, and I am a bookaholic. First, let me just say thank you for your tremendous response to this podcast. I really appreciate it so much. It's great to know that I have kindred souls out there who can actually relate to what I'm talking about. Now, today, before we dive into crafting your reading plan for 2021, I want to digress to the first episode. In my intro and my trailer, Bookaholic is referred to as a safe space. Now, a little bit, I was feeling a little bit cheeky and making light of our reading and book obsession. However, I realized after I had recorded the first episode that a lot of people were turned on to books, perhaps when you were a child or a teen. Books were your only friends. Maybe you were called a geek or a nerd because you read books. Maybe some of you even had that double whammy of wearing glasses and reading books. So you were called a four-eyed geek or a four-eyed nerd. Even though most people listening to this podcast are now full-grown people, we can still live with the trauma or the residue of the trauma from bullying or being picked on. Even now, if you happen to live with a non-reader, you may get some kind of ribbing from your partner from time to time about reading so many books, and maybe you're not talking to them or whatever. Somehow they kind of maybe make you feel guilty that you're reading books. So I just want to re-emphasize that Bookaholic is truly a safe space where you are amongst friends. At the end of 2019, turning into 2020, I realized I was not reading enough books by African American authors. I also realized that I had not read enough African American classics. For example, I had not read any James Baldwin, which I know is blasphemy. In book reading, it's in and of itself blasphemy, and I'm highly embarrassed by it. It's embarrassing that now I am just now discovering the genius that is James Baldwin. We didn't read James Baldwin in school, whether high school or junior high or middle school, even in college. I did read African American literature in college. It's just the particular class I was in did not cover James Baldwin. I don't know how that is, but I'm just saying, sidebar note, we need more classes earlier on in kids' lives that focus on African American authors, or I should say, a diverse group of authors. Because I live in the South, we studied the Southern writers, say like Robert Penn Warren and Tennessee Williams, but we never did really focus on any other, we didn't get more diverse than our region. I'll just say it like that. So reading diversely is extremely important to kids. You shouldn't have to wait to college to read diverse literature that means something to our overall culture, our overall American culture. So, anyway, I also wanted to read more memoirs and biographies. And I was spurred onward towards this goal because I did read our former First Lady Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. I wrote a list that I also put on my blog, and the post is called There is Actually a Method to the Madness. Now, let me just say this. I have one website, but two URLs. So you can check out www.msmediacontent.com. That's msmediacontent.com. And it will take you straight to my blog where you can find There is Actually a Method to the Madness post. It will also take you to this podcast. So you can do that, or you can just do the book-a-holic.com/podcast. So I tell you that so that you can go back and again read that blog post called There is Actually a Method to the Madness. But we are going to go over that here on this podcast. So my goal for 2020, reading goal for 2020, was to read one memoir or autobiography, one biography, a self-help book, 4 books by Black writers from any category, a business book, and then the rest could just be any variations of historical fiction, a beach read, the popular book of the year, a suspense/thriller. Now, I'm a very busy person, so I needed a way to keep up with all of these books. Now, I did decide to strive and read one book per month. So I did make that goal. I joined the Goodreads annual reading challenge. And I don't know if you know about Goodreads or not, but it's goodreads.com. And you can store your books, quote unquote, store your books on a bookshelf of the ones that you want to read, the ones that you are currently reading, the ones that you have finished. You can keep up with that, which I think is a great, great thing that to do there. It just keeps you organized a little bit. So all you have to do is indicate how many books you want to read in the year. Also, if you join their annual reading challenge. And I've joined the reading challenge for quite some time. Some years I've done terrible and other years I've done fantastic. Last year was the only year that I actually made my goal. And the only thing that I was striving to do was read one book a month. So 12 books in a year, and I accomplished it. Now, for some of you, and I've looked at some of my friends on Goodreads, I mean, that might be just a small goal because I have one friend on Goodreads, and her goal for 2021 is to read 100 books. So I don't know how she's going to do that. I have no idea, but I know that even though I may have 100 books that I want to read, 100 books in my house that I need to read, I don't want to set myself up for failure because I am such a busy person. So I just want to do some very bite-sized, achievable goals. And if I go beyond that, hey, that's a cherry on top for me. It's kind of like I want to under-promise myself, but over-deliver kind of thought. So I did say, though, I do believe I can accomplish reading 18 books this year. I did amp it up by 6 more books from last year. So that is my goal, 18 books for this year. Now, I haven't necessarily divided it out like I just shared with you, like last year. It seems to me from my recent buying habits, and when I say recent, I'm saying the last 6 months, my recent book buying habits has been more African American writers. I am not sure. It just seems like it's an explosion. I may not be right about this, but it seems like there's an explosion of great, fantastic African American writers right now. So their books are just right there in your face, whether you go into Books a Million or independent bookstores or right there on Amazon. A lot of books right now coming out that are really winning awards or have been written by African American authors, which is a great thing. So my reading seems to be pulling more into that. And like I said, like my last year's goal was to read more African American authors. And so I am still on that goal because I think in this day and time, a little bit, we need to shore up on our own culture because we do live in a culture that's more skewed to the majority culture. But then I also believe the majority culture needs to read more of other people's cultures. I think that's how we can become more understanding of each other and why we all are reacting the way we are right now. So, reading has a lot of things that it can help accomplish. So I know I've gotten a little bit off track with that, but anyway, those are just my thoughts. So really, I would like to know more about how you come to the conclusion about your reading goals. If you're in a book club or book clubs, please feel free to reach out to me and share with me how your book club decides which books to read. Do you do it on an annual basis? Do you do it monthly? Is there a particular person each month that picks out the book? I'm very curious about this. And I guess a lot of you are saying, well, shouldn't you know? Isn't she part of a book club? No, I'm not part of a book club because, again, I will repeat for the 30th time, I'm a really busy person. And so to be in a book club and be pressured to have a book done in 30 days and other people holding me accountable, I kind of don't want to set myself up for failure again in that way. So I never did join a book club. I just put those pressures on myself as an individual. So I didn't want to let anybody down or worse, let myself down in a book club. So no, I have not been part of a book club, but I'm really, really interested to have some feedback from members of book clubs to tell me how you come to the conclusion of your book selection. So one of the things, like I shared with you, is Goodreads and how that helps keep me organized on my reading. But some of you may not like, this is going back to like episode 1, where I was talking about the technology piece. Some of you may not necessarily want to go to a Goodreads and put things on a virtual shelf and that type of thing, even though it's very, very simple and very easy to do so. But you could be like me sometimes. I love putting pen to paper because it feels like I'm actually downloading my real thoughts on paper and that it's really finite once it touches that paper. And so you may want to do your reading challenges and your reading coordination and organization on paper. So feel free to head over to my website. Again, that's www.msmediacontent.com, msmediacontent.com. It's also the same with the Bookaholic, book-a-holic.com. And click on the menu titled Merch, MERCH. Scroll down and you will see where I have free reading planners. Yes, I have free reading planners. You can certainly download to your computer and use to plot and plan your reading for 2021. Consider it my free gift to you. And you'll simply just go online, select the reading planner. One, you can select all of them and download them to your computer. It will take you through like it's actually like you're actually buying some merchandise, but it's all free. You'll see that it's $0.00. And when you get finished putting in the information, a screen will pop up and will list all your downloads and you can download from there. So enjoy. I hope you'll be able to use it. So in a few minutes, I'll get back to you and let you know what I've been up to since my last podcast. So I guess you're wondering, how did my 2020 reading goal planning shore up? I had told you the types of books that I wanted to read and that I wanted to read 12 books for 2020. So we know I accomplished my goal for 2020 for the number of books, 12 books. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Because in 2019, I only recorded that I read 2 books. And I know I had to have read more books than that, but that's what I recorded on Goodreads. And so, of course, now you can never remember what you may have done a couple of years before. So it's good to just make sure you keep up with what you're reading. So here's how I measured up. I said I wanted to read 1 memoir or 1 autobiography in 2020, and I read 0. I did not read a memoir or an autobiography in 2020, nor did I read a biography. I did not read a self-help book. I do have a lot of spiritual readings that I read on a daily basis. So I guess you could count that. But if they're dated for each day, you sort of don't ever really finish them, because if you miss a day, you may not really finish them, but you just have those around for inspiration as needed. I had said I wanted to read 4 books by Black writers. I read 3 books by Black writers. I read Queenie by Candace Carty Williams. I read Jasmine Guillory's Royal Holiday. And I read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And we will discuss in future podcasts, we will discuss The Vanishing Half and compare it to a book that I shared on my first podcast called Passing. We will discuss both of those books and compare them and see how we fare with that. I do want to get into discussing The Vanishing Half, because that was according to all the charts that I've seen, it was the top book for 2020. I didn't see those official words, but it looked like that was the top book for 2020. So I'm interested to see what you all think about The Vanishing Half. I also wanted to read 1 business book, and I did not read one into completion, but I did read historical fiction. I did read Stephanie Marie Thornton's And They Called It Camelot, and I read City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. And I do believe City of Girls was probably the 2019 book that was hugely popular. I mentioned that I wanted to read the popular book of the year, and I think that would be between Big Summer by Jennifer Weiner, of course, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and The Guest House by Lucy Foley. It may even be considered The Wives by Taryn Fisher. So I definitely got the popular book category checked off really well. And suspense thriller, that would go kick back to The Guest House by Lucy Foley. The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Buchanan. I hope that's pronounced correctly. And again, The Wives by Taryn Fisher. So I did okay. I did pretty okay. I just didn't read the nonfiction as well as I should have been reading. So, hey, I've got room for improvement, right? Like I said, it's a safe space. We're not going to judge. As long as we're reading, that's the important thing. All right. Well, as we've been discussing our 2021 reading plans and planning for that, I have to tell you that my 2021 reading plan is incomplete at this moment. It's because I am still busy in curating the books. I'm still getting books in. I'm still purchasing books, and I'm going to craft it down and put it in certain ways to make it more interesting, to go beyond just a biography or just a historical fiction piece, maybe even making it a little bit more granular to say, hey, I'm going to read a historical fiction piece from the 1920s, something more specific, because you really can get that specific about your reading planning. So I will be sharing that with you in a future podcast before it gets long enough into the year. Hopefully, it will be next week and next week's podcast, but I just don't want to pin myself in. But I am going to have that down, and I will share the specifics of what I'm going to have on my plate for the 2021 reading year. So, since the last podcast, let me catch up on some stuff that I've been doing. First, I've gained lots of followers on social media and on my podcast platform. So, I'm super excited about that. It's just been a really great response, like I said earlier, to the Bookaholics podcast. In addition to reading Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which I told you about last week, I am reading Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson, whom I hope to interview on a future podcast. So that would be very exciting. Cross your fingers for me. So I'm making headway in the interview area as well. So like I said last week, you won't have to hear me droning on the whole time during the podcast. I also picked up a signed first edition copy of Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. Grown is a YA book that falls under the mystery, thriller, and psychological fiction genres. It's getting a lot of buzz. So I think you should get a copy. Yes, I am a grown woman and I do read a YA book, usually at least one a year. But again, that's another area where a lot of African American authors are really doing a tremendous job. And I may be reading more than one YA book this year. So I think Angie Thomas, I think is her name. She wrote The Hate You Give. She has a new book out. I think it's called Concrete Love. I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but you can Google it. And it's got a lot of buzz to it as well. So don't hesitate and don't be embarrassed to pick up a YA book. I do it all the time. So, but anyway, I also picked up a beautiful coffee table book featuring independent bookstores from around the world called Do You Read Me? So it's really beautiful and very interesting just to take a look through. And just check out my podcast page on my website, and I will have all the links to all the podcast platforms I'm on, and the books that I talked about in this episode will be there in the show notes. So as soon as I upload the podcast, I also upload the show notes. And show notes are where you can read a synopsis of what happened on the podcast. It'll even give you a breakdown on timestamps where you can just go and move your cursor over to a particular timestamp to hear what I'm speaking about. So just stay tuned for that. And so coming up in our next podcast, we're going to talk about curating books for your children and how to get them to love reading. And also, as I told you before, we're going to be talking about in February, we're going to celebrate 4 little known authors and influencers of the Harlem Renaissance. Make sure you follow me on Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, and Stitcher podcast platforms, among others. And also follow me on Instagram at True Bookaholics. I also now have a Pinterest called True Bookaholics. You can also contact me at readingjunkie@book-a-holic.com. So once again, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for listening. And until next time, my name is Deirdre Pippins, and I am a bookaholic. See ya.
Thank you for joining the Bookaholic podcast. We appreciate your support. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Instagram at True Bookaholic. You can also email us at readingjunkie@book-a-holic.com. Don't forget to support your local library and independent bookstores.